I still remember the morning like it happened yesterday. Sunlight spilled across my backyard, birds were singing, and the scent of wildflowers mingled with the subtle aroma of my homemade honey. I had spent months nurturing my beehives, countless hours tending to them, ensuring each colony thrived, harvesting honey with care, pride, and love. And then it hit me, the unthinkable. I walked into my backyard to check on the hives, humming softly, expecting the usual buzz of bees and the gentle hum of nature. But the first thing I noticed was a hive box left open, the honeycombs ripped apart as if someone had ripped the sweetness straight from my life. Panic surged, and my heart dropped into my stomach. My honey. My labor. Gone. At first, I thought it had to be a wild animal, raccoons, maybe, or one of the pesky bears that sometimes wandered near the edge of the forest. But then I noticed the footprints. Footprints not of a bear, not of a raccoon, but unmistakably human. And when I followed the trail toward the driveway, my blood ran cold. There she was. HOA Karen. My neighbor, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, was loading jars of my honey into her shiny SUV like it was her birthright. I froze for a second, disbelief clouding my mind. I had heard stories, everyone had stories about Karen, but I never imagined she would stoop this low. She looked up, smirked, and gave me that infuriating, patronizing smile, like she hadn't just stolen my property but had somehow performed an act of civic duty. I wanted to yell, to charge at her, to shake every jar from her hands. But I stopped. I realized anger alone wouldn't help me reclaim what was mine. I needed a plan, something bold, something she would never expect. And then it hit me. Right beyond the fence, the woods were alive. Black bears roamed there, strong, wild, fearless. And in that instant, I made a decision. If Karen thought she could take what wasn't hers, maybe it was time she learned a lesson that no amount of HOA meetings, fines, or complaints could teach her. I couldn't wait to see her reaction. After witnessing Karen's audacious theft, I knew that simply confronting her would accomplish nothing. The HOA rules, fines, and neighborhood gossip were powerless against someone who truly believed she was untouchable. So, I retreated to my workshop, a small shed at the edge of my backyard, where I often tinkered with tools and inventions. Today, it would become my war room. I spread out a detailed map of the property line, the forest edge, and the locations of the beehives. I knew the bears patrolled the woods, moving stealthily through the underbrush at night, their keen sense of smell unmatched. It struck me, these creatures were naturally drawn to honey, and if I could harness that instinct, I could let nature do my bidding in a way no human law could touch. But it had to be careful. I didn't want the bears or anyone else hurt, just Karen. My mind raced as I sketched diagrams, outlining a path that would lead the bears directly to her SUV, parked carelessly in the driveway after she had hauled away my stolen jars. I researched bear behavior, learning their habits, the times they were most active, and what would lure them without putting anyone in serious danger. I spent hours assembling a trail of temptation, using a mixture of my sweetest honey, strategically placed leading from the woods to her car. Each jar was bait, carefully set to attract their attention without making them suspicious. I imagined Karen opening her car later, admiring her prize, completely unaware of the wild guests she was about to entertain. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the air grew colder, and the forest came alive with subtle rustling. I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in years, a mix of fear, anticipation, and that undeniable surge of justice coming my way. The plan was risky, unpredictable, and utterly perfect. I stepped back and surveyed my work. It looked simple enough, almost innocent. But in reality, it was a trap of poetic justice. Karen had taken what was mine, underestimating both my patience and my ingenuity. Now, nature itself would teach her a lesson. I couldn't help but smile, imagining the shock on her face when she realized that my honey wasn't just sweet, it was a warning. All that was left was to wait. The bears would do the rest. And as I retreated to my porch to watch from a safe distance, I felt the adrenaline pumping through me. Tonight, the wild was my ally. Tonight, HOA Karen would meet consequences she never saw coming. The night settled in like a velvet curtain, thick and quiet, yet buzzing with anticipation. From my porch, I could see the faint outlines of the forest, the shadows of trees swaying in the wind. I felt a strange mix of anxiety and exhilaration. This wasn't just about honey anymore, it was about sending a message, a reminder that actions have consequences. I double-checked my setup. Each jar of honey gleamed faintly under the moonlight, positioned carefully along the path I had mapped for the bears. A subtle trail led from the edge of the woods, winding past the bushes, toward the driveway where Karen's SUV gleamed in the faint light of her porch lamp. Every detail mattered. One misstep, one stray bear in the wrong place, and my plan could fail spectacularly. As I settled into my chair, I reflected on Karen's arrogance. She had strutted through our neighborhood for years, wielding HOA rules like a sword, scaring neighbors into compliance. But tonight, her self-importance would meet reality, the raw, untamed power of nature. And the irony wasn't lost on me. Karen, who fancied herself untouchable, about to be confronted by creatures she had dismissed as wild nuisances. I tried to sleep, but adrenaline refused to let me rest. Every rustle in the trees made my heart leap. I wondered if a bear would appear earlier than expected, sniffing out the sweet scent that had been left like a breadcrumb trail. I imagined the scene: massive, sleek black bodies moving cautiously through the darkness, drawn by instinct, yet guided unknowingly by my plan. Hours passed. Somewhere in the distance, a fox howled, a coyote barked, and the world seemed alive with hidden life. I reminded myself that patience was essential. Bears did not move on command. They were unpredictable, powerful, and intelligent. And yet, their love for honey was legendary. That single weakness could be exploited to deliver the lesson Karen deserved. Finally, I drifted into a light sleep, one eye open in imagination. I pictured her waking in the morning, smiling smugly, unaware that each jar she thought she had stolen would become the catalyst for her chaos. I imagined her confusion, her panic, her disbelief. And then, I smiled. Sweet justice, I thought. Literally. By the first faint light of dawn, the forest would stir, the honey would lure its visitors, and HOA Karen would find herself part of a story she would never forget. Tonight, I wasn't just a neighbor, I was a conductor orchestrating a symphony of natural justice. The first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon, casting long, golden streaks across the backyard. The air was crisp, tinged with the faint scent of honey and pine. I crept to my porch, coffee in hand, heart pounding with anticipation. Today, the plan I had spent hours perfecting would finally come to life. I scanned the edge of the forest, and then I saw them, shadows moving silently among the trees. Two sleek black bears emerged cautiously, sniffing the air, noses twitching. My pulse quickened. They were magnificent, powerful, and completely focused on the trail I had laid out. Every jar of honey gleamed like a beacon, a promise of indulgence that they could not resist. The bears moved gracefully, almost as if they were aware of the trail but unaware of who had set it. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, not wanting to startle them. My mind raced with the possibilities, imagining Karen's face when the chaos began, imagining her surprise and horror. I could hardly contain my excitement. Meanwhile, across the street, Karen emerged, still oblivious, sipping her morning coffee and strutting toward her SUV with a smug grin. I watched, hidden, as she unlocked her car, completely unaware of the approaching guests. The moment of reckoning was imminent. My heart thudded in rhythm with the bear's silent steps. The first bear reached the driveway edge and sniffed the air. The golden jars in the back of Karen's SUV were irresistible. With a careful, deliberate paw, it nudged the tailgate open. I held my breath. Karen, still focused on her phone, didn't notice the unfolding chaos. The bear grabbed a jar, examined it, and then, like a force of nature, tipped it over. Honey oozed across the metal floor, glistening in the sunlight. The second bear followed, drawn by the scent and curiosity. Soon, both of them were rummaging, pawing, and spilling jars everywhere. Honey dripped onto the driveway, onto Karen's pristine shoes, and onto her car tires. Her eyes finally lifted from her phone. And when she saw them, the massive black bears, fearlessly stealing what she thought was hers, her scream shattered the quiet morning. I couldn't help but laugh. Sweet, glorious laughter. Justice was being served by claws, paws, and instinct. Karen scrambled, waving her arms, trying to shoo them away, but the bears had no intention of leaving empty-handed. Each jar she had stolen became an agent of poetic retribution. From my porch, I watched the chaos unfold, adrenaline surging, a grin plastered across my face. This was more than revenge, it was a spectacle, a lesson in humility delivered by nature itself. Karen would never forget this morning. Karen's scream echoed across the neighborhood like a siren, drawing curious glances from other early risers. I stayed hidden, trying not to burst into uncontrollable laughter as the scene unfolded. The two black bears were relentless, pawing through the SUV, knocking over jars, and smearing honey across every surface. The golden liquid dripped onto the driveway, glinting in the morning sun, and Karen's face shifted rapidly from disbelief to panic. She stomped her feet, waved her arms, and shouted, "Get out of here! This is my property! Go! Go!" But the bears, oblivious to human authority, continued their feast. Honey smeared across her dashboard, her seats, and her carefully polished floor mats. Each paw swipe was a slap of justice, a silent lecture delivered by nature's most fearless enforcers. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains and fences, whispering, snapping pictures, and recording videos. Some were laughing, some were horrified, but all were captivated. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of neighborhood order, was being outmaneuvered by wild animals over jars of honey she didn't even earn. The first bear paused, sniffing at a jar that had rolled onto the street. Karen lunged toward it, but instinct and size were not on her side. The bear swatted her hand away gently yet firmly, sending her stumbling backward. Meanwhile, the second bear had climbed partially into the SUV, investigating each compartment, pawing through the last few jars with determined precision. Time seemed to stretch. Honey dripped down the SUV's tires, ran across the driveway, and even onto Karen's shoes. She slipped slightly, shrieking, and attempted to regain her balance. My heart pounded in my chest, not with fear, but exhilaration. This was the moment I had imagined for weeks, her arrogance colliding headfirst with the raw power of nature. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bears, their curiosity and hunger satisfied, slowly retreated toward the woods. They left behind a mess of sticky evidence, overturned jars, and a very red-faced Karen standing in the middle of her driveway, covered in honey, flustered, and utterly defeated. The morning sun reflected off the golden liquid smeared across her car and shoes, making her predicament all the more humiliating. I stepped onto my porch, trying to contain my laughter, and called out gently, "Morning, Karen. Enjoying your breakfast?" She turned, eyes blazing, honey dripping from her hands, and for the first time, she looked truly powerless. Nature had delivered her lesson, and I had witnessed every glorious second. Karen stood in the middle of her driveway, honey dripping from her hands, shoes, and even strands of her hair. Her carefully curated image of authority and control had crumbled in less than 10 minutes. I could barely keep myself from laughing outright as neighbors emerged, cameras in hand, capturing every sticky detail. The neighborhood had never seen anything like this. She tried to regain her composure, straightening her blouse and attempting to speak with authority, but her voice wavered. This is, this is unacceptable, she sputtered, gesturing toward the SUV and the ruined honey jars. But her words sounded hollow, powerless against the spectacle she had just endured. Even the mailman passing by paused, raising an eyebrow at the surreal scene. I decided to step forward, keeping a calm tone as I addressed her. Karen, those jars were mine. You took them without permission. I tried to solve this quietly, but, well, nature has its ways. I didn't need to say more. The combination of bears, honey, and public embarrassment had done more than any argument could. Her HOA rules, her fines, her threats, they meant nothing here. Neighbors gathered, murmuring among themselves. Some whispered about Karen's history of overstepping boundaries, while others laughed quietly at the irony of the situation. For once, Karen had no power. She wasn't the HOA enforcer or the queen of the neighborhood. She was simply human, humbled by forces she could not control. Karen tried to protest further, pointing at the bear's retreating figures in the distance. This is not fair. You shouldn't have, you can't, her voice trailed off as she realized the futility of her words. Every jar she had stolen had been rendered useless, the honey smeared across her property and reclaimed by the wild indirectly. Her plan to steal what wasn't hers had completely backfired. I watched her flail, not out of malice, but because justice had a way of being poetic. The lesson was clear: actions have consequences, especially when you think rules and authority place you above them. Karen's facade had crumbled in front of the entire street. And as the neighbors snapped photos and videos, the story of the morning would spread quickly, immortalizing her misjudgment. By the time the bears disappeared into the forest, Karen had retreated inside, muttering angrily to herself, sticky and defeated. I cleaned up my porch, savoring the calm after the storm. Nature had been my ally, and the message had been delivered perfectly. It was over, but the story, the spectacle, would be remembered for a long time. By late morning, word of the bear incident had spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. I stepped outside and immediately noticed the curious glances from neighbors walking their dogs, jogging, or peeking from behind curtains. Some waved at me with smirks, others whispered eagerly about the chaos they had witnessed online. Even the local community group chat was buzzing with videos of Karen, honey-covered and flustered, desperately trying to shoo off two massive black bears. I couldn't deny a sense of satisfaction. For years, Karen had ruled the HOA with a combination of arrogance and fear, enforcing rules with an iron fist and intimidating anyone who dared challenge her. But today, she had learned firsthand that power has limits and that nature respects no one's ego. The bears had delivered a lesson far more memorable than any legal notice or neighborly warning ever could. Later, as I tended to my hives, I noticed Karen peeking through her blinds, likely contemplating her next move. She had retreated indoors, sticky and flustered, trying to regain her dignity. I imagined her rehearsing apologies, excuses, and explanations in her mind. But the truth was undeniable: her theft had backfired spectacularly, and the neighborhood had witnessed every second. By mid-afternoon, Karen attempted what I assumed was her damage control. She stepped outside cautiously, clipboard in hand, attempting to look composed, hoping to assert some authority once more. But the collective smirks, whispers, and side glances from neighbors made it clear: she had lost credibility. I could see her frustration mounting as she realized that no amount of formal HOA procedures could erase what had happened this morning. I approached her, calm and measured, carrying a small jar of honey I had set aside. "Karen," I said gently, "you can have this, but remember, it's always better to ask first." She stared, speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The irony was delicious. She wanted control, she wanted authority, but today, humility had been served alongside the honey. By the evening, the neighborhood had fully processed the spectacle. Conversations about HOA regulations had been replaced by laughter, storytelling, and shared amusement. Videos of the bears rummaging through Karen's SUV were circulating online, bringing light-hearted chaos to an otherwise ordinary day. I leaned back on my porch, sipping my tea, and smiled. Justice had been served in a way no one including Karen would ever forget. By the next morning, Karen's ego had taken a serious hit. The sticky, honey-coated disaster of the previous day had become the talk of the neighborhood, and social media posts showing her flailing against the bears were spreading like wildfire. She tried to maintain her composure, but every glance from a neighbor reminded her that she was now the subject of ridicule rather than respect. Inside her house, she paced frantically, muttering to herself, trying to come up with excuses, apologies, or even an explanation that might save face. But the reality was inescapable. She had stolen property that didn't belong to her, and the natural world had intervened to teach her a lesson in ways no one could ignore. Even the HOA meetings she usually commanded with authority couldn't rewrite what had happened. Later that day, I saw her outside, attempting to clean the sticky mess from her shoes and driveway. Her movements were precise, careful, almost robotic. But the damage was already done. The golden honey smeared across her car and driveway served as a constant reminder of her misjudgment. The bears hadn't harmed anyone, but they had delivered an unforgettable message: arrogance and theft have consequences. I approached her once more, this time calmly, as she wiped the last traces of honey from her shoes. "Karen," I said softly, "I hope this morning has been enlightening. Perhaps next time, asking first will save a lot of trouble for both of us." Her eyes met mine, a mixture of shame, frustration, and reluctant acknowledgement reflecting back. She opened her mouth to respond but ultimately said nothing. Words couldn't erase the memory of what had occurred. By evening, the neighborhood had fully embraced the story as legend. Children laughed as they reenacted the bear chase in their yards, neighbors joked over fences, and I couldn't help but smile at the poetic justice that had unfolded. Karen, once untouchable, now understood that power could be fleeting and respect must be earned, not demanded. I returned to my hives, tending to them as the sun dipped below the horizon. The bees buzzed softly, their honey still sweet and untouched, a reminder that patience, preparation, and a little ingenuity could restore balance in the world. Justice, it seemed, was sometimes delivered in the wildest, most unexpected ways, and today, it had been unforgettable. By the time darkness fell, Karen had retreated indoors, reflective and humbled. The bears were gone, the honey recovered in spirit if not in substance, and the neighborhood had witnessed a spectacle that would be talked about for years. Lessons had been learned, pride humbled, and a sense of order restored not by rules, but by nature itself. The days following the bear incident were surreal. Karen barely ventured outside, her once commanding presence reduced to cautious peeks through the blinds. The neighborhood buzzed with laughter and retellings of the spectacle. Social media posts immortalized the moment she had faced wild, unstoppable nature over a few jars of stolen honey. Every view, like, and comment felt like a small victory for justice. I, on the other hand, returned to my backyard, tending my hives with a mix of pride and amusement. The bees continued their work undisturbed, producing golden honey with the same steady rhythm as always. Watching them reminded me that patience and cleverness often yield sweeter results than force or confrontation ever could. The bears had been my unexpected allies, delivering justice more poetic and effective than any complaint or lawsuit ever could. Karen eventually emerged from her house, carefully, as though the world itself might strike her down again. She approached me hesitantly one morning, holding an empty jar of honey. I think I overstepped," she muttered, her voice soft, almost apologetic. I accepted the gesture with a nod, smiling. Words weren't necessary, the lesson had been learned, the humiliation endured, and the message delivered loud and clear. From that point on, our neighborhood dynamics shifted subtly but undeniably. People smiled more openly, joking about HOA bear enforcement and sharing stories of the legendary morning when nature itself corrected arrogance. Karen became quieter, more cautious, and more respectful, not because of rules, fines, or authority, but because she had experienced firsthand the consequences of selfish actions. As for me, I found joy in small things, the buzz of bees, the golden glint of honey in sunlight, and the knowledge that justice doesn't always have to be bitter. Sometimes, it can be as sweet as the honey in your own backyard. And as the bears wandered off into the forest, I knew they had done their part, leaving behind only memories, laughter, and a sticky reminder that no one is above nature. That morning, Karen learned humility, the neighborhood learned entertainment, and I learned that patience, strategy, and a little help from the wild can achieve things no human power ever could. Sweet justice had been served literally and figuratively, and everyone, including the bears, had played their part. The bees buzzed on, the sun set gently, and I smiled, knowing that life had a way of balancing itself. Nature had delivered, and I had witnessed the most unforgettable lesson in fairness and humility my neighborhood would ever see.